I'm not no killer. I'm not no murderer. I'm not no bad person. And a lot of people aren't.
This is one of those cases that shakes you to your core, the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about family, love, and the safety of your own home. It was January 24, 2021. The world kept moving, but inside one Indianapolis home, an unthinkable horror was unfolding. A day that began with familiar voices and routine conversations ended with blood, silence, and a single survivor left to tell the story. A father, a mother, 3 children, and a young pregnant woman, wiped out in a matter of minutes. The killer? Someone who should have been their protector, their own flesh and blood. By the time the gunfire stopped, 6 lives were gone, including an unborn baby who never had the chance to take his first breath. Why would a 17-year-old turn a gun on his own family? What led to the slaughter of the child's family? And in the end, was justice truly served? This is the horrifying case of Raymond Childs III. Raymond Childs Jr. was a man of quiet strength, the kind of father who led with both discipline and unwavering love. At 42 years old, he had worked hard to build a stable home, ensuring that his family never lacked the essentials. He carried himself with a firm but fair demeanor, a man who believed in structure, in teaching his children responsibility, and in setting a standard they could follow. Those who knew him described him as a man of principle, someone who didn't just speak about values but lived by them. He shared his life with his wife Kezzy Childs, a woman whose presence could light up a room. She had a way of making people feel at home, whether it was through her warm smile, her soft-spoken encouragement, or the way she always seemed to know when someone needed help. Kezzy was a nurturer at heart, a woman who balanced the roles of a mother, wife, and caregiver with grace. She loved deeply and fiercely, her devotion to her family evident in every meal she cooked, every hug she gave, and every lesson she taught. Their home on Adams Street wasn't extravagant, but it was filled with the small, familiar comforts of family life. Laughter echoed through the walls, dinner conversations stretched long into the evening, and even in moments of tension, love was always present. The Childs family had its share of struggles, like any family, but they faced them together. At 18, Elijah Childs stood on the threshold of adulthood, a young man with dreams that extended beyond the 4 walls of his home. He had his father's drive, his mother's warmth, and a protective instinct when it came to his younger siblings. He was known for his calm nature, someone who took his responsibilities seriously. Friends saw him as dependable, the type of person you could call at any time, knowing he'd show up. His relationship with Kiara Hawkins, his 19-year-old girlfriend, had been a source of excitement and nervous anticipation. In just a few days they were expecting a child, a little boy who was already named Chaos. The weight of impending fatherhood sat heavy on Elijah's shoulders, but he was ready. He had plans. He was determined to do things right. His younger sister, 13-year-old Rita Childs, was still discovering who she was. She was full of life, that delicate age where childhood and adolescence blend into something uncertain but exciting. She was expressive, her personality bubbling to the surface in ways that made her family laugh. Rita had her own dreams, ones she was still figuring out, but whatever she chose to pursue, there was no doubt she would have done it with passion. The middle child, 15 years old, often found himself caught between 2 worlds. Too old to be treated like a kid, too young to be seen as an adult. He leaned on his older brother, looked up to him even when he wouldn't always admit it. He was still carving out his own identity, still trying to find his place. But he knew one thing for certain: family mattered. And then there was Kiara. At 19, she was about to embark on the most life-changing journey of all, motherhood. The final weeks of pregnancy had been exhausting, her body heavy with the weight of the little life growing inside her. But despite the discomfort, she was excited. She and Elijah had talked about their future, whispered plans and quiet moments about what their lives would look like once their son arrived. She dreamed of what Chaos would look like, who he would become, how she would raise him to be strong, to be kind. She was ready. The child's family was on the brink of something new, a baby on the way, Elijah stepping into adulthood, the younger siblings finding their place. It should have been a time of change, yes, but a time filled with anticipation, with hope. But life has a way of turning without warning. The walls of that home had held so much love, so many late-night talks, so many shared meals, quiet prayers, whispered reassurances that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. None of them could have known that in just a few hours, their lives would be taken away by one of their own. They would never get to see Chaos take his first breath. They would never get to see Elijah grow into the man he was meant to be. They would never know what Rita might have become or where life would have taken the middle child. Everything they had built, everything they had planned for, erased in a single night. What happened inside that house was more than just a crime. It was an act that defied reason, one that left a gaping hole in the lives of those who knew them. The child's family didn't just become victims, they became a haunting reminder of how quickly everything can be taken away. And the most disturbing part? The person responsible had been sitting at the same dinner table, sharing the same meals, living under the same roof. The story of the child's family wasn't supposed to end this way, but it did, and in the aftermath, all that remained were the questions. The questions lingered, heavy and unrelenting. They crept into the minds of neighbors, investigators, and those who had known the child's family. How could something so unthinkable happen within a home that, from the outside, had seemed so whole? What force had turned the warmth of family into something unspeakable? To understand, they had to look deeper, beyond the smiling photographs and the holiday gatherings, into the quiet tensions that had been brewing beneath the surface. Raymond Childs III was the second-born son, 17 years old, standing at the crossroads between adolescence and adulthood. He carried his father's name, a weighty legacy that came with expectations. His father was a man who valued order, structure, and discipline. He had worked hard to build a stable life for his family, and in return he expected respect, obedience, and a willingness to follow the rules he set. Raymond III had grown up under his father's firm hand, learning early that stepping out of line came with consequences. But as he grew older, he began to resist. He wanted more freedom, more control over his own life. He chafed against the rules that dictated his every move. What time he had to be home, who he could associate with, how he spent his time. The conflict between him and his father had started subtly, in the way he would take a little longer to respond when called, in the way he would linger outside just a bit too long after curfew. At first, these small acts of defiance were brushed off as teenage rebellion, but as the months passed, the tension between father and son deepened, shifting from small disagreements to outright confrontations. On the night of January 23, something finally broke. Raymond III had been out long past the time he was supposed to be home. His father was waiting when he walked through the door, his expression unreadable but his presence enough to make the air feel heavier. There was no immediate explosion of anger, no shouting the second the door closed behind him. Instead, there was silence, the kind that stretched uncomfortably, suffocating in its weight. Then came the words, sharp, pointed, filled with the kind of frustration that had been simmering for too long. His father didn't yell, but the tone in his voice left no room for argument. He was done with the excuses, done with the defiance. There would be consequences. Raymond III's response was immediate. He pushed back first with words, then with more. His father was treating him like a child, refusing to acknowledge that he was nearly grown. He was tired of the lectures, the punishments, the feeling that he was being controlled. But his father didn't see it that way. In his eyes, this was about respect, about responsibility, about a son who was slipping away from the values he had worked so hard to instill. The argument escalated. Kezzy, always the peacemaker, tried to step in, her voice calm but firm, attempting to diffuse the storm that was brewing. But neither father nor son were in a place to listen. Elijah had been upstairs when it started, the familiar rise and fall of voices drawing his attention. He knew his father well. He knew when the arguments crossed the line from mere disagreements to something heavier. He had learned over the years to pick his battles, to stay out of the way when tensions flared. But something about this argument felt different. It carried a sharpness that made his stomach twist. Rita had heard it too. She sat in her room, staring at the closed door, unsure whether to come out or stay put. She had always hated when her family fought. She preferred the nights when they sat together in the living room, laughing at a movie they had all seen 100 times before, when things felt safe, unshaken. The middle child, 15 years old, was listening from a few doors down, his mind running through possible outcomes. He had seen this cycle before, the argument, the anger, the aftermath. It would pass, it always did, but this time something was different. Raymond III's anger didn't subside, it lingered, thick in his chest, pressing against his ribs like something solid. He felt backed into a corner, pushed too far. In his mind, he had lost control of his own life, and there was only one way to get it back. No one in that house knew what was about to happen. No one knew that by morning their names would be on the news, their faces on headlines, their home reduced to nothing more than a crime scene. No one knew that one of their own was about to commit an act that would erase an entire family in mere moments. And by the time the first gunshot rang out, it was already too late. The sound shattered the silence, a deafening crack that ripped through the home. In an instant, everything changed. The walls that once held the warmth of family dinners and holiday laughter now absorbed the echoes of something irreversible. A single gunshot, and then another. It was the early hours of January 24, 2021. Outside, the city of Indianapolis lay in its usual winter stillness. The streets were empty, the cold pressing against the houses like an unseen force. Neighbors slept, unaware that just beyond their doors, inside the child's home, a nightmare was unfolding. Inside, the family had been thrown into chaos. The air, once heavy with lingering tension, now carried something far worse: fear. Kezi's voice rang out, a desperate plea, but it was quickly drowned out by another shot. The echo of it vibrated through the walls, through the bodies of those still standing, through the very foundation of the home. The children, frozen in shock, barely had time to process what was happening. Elijah, the eldest son, had always known his younger brother had a temper. He had seen the way Raymond III bristled at their father's authority, how he resented the rules that were meant to shape him into a man, but never, not once, did he think it would come to this. His father had always been strict but never cruel. He demanded respect, enforced discipline, made sure his children knew right from wrong. He expected his sons to grow into men who carried themselves with dignity, who understood the value of hard work and family. But Raymond III had never embraced those lessons the way Elijah had. There was something different about him, something simmering beneath the surface, always threatening to boil over. The scent of gunpowder thickened in the air, a cruel contrast to the home's usual warmth. Kezi, the woman who had spent her life nurturing, protecting, and loving her children, was now the one in need of saving. She had always been the peacemaker, the soft voice of reason when tensions rose between father and son. But there was no time now. She barely had time to take a step toward her son before another shot rang out. Her body jerked as the bullet found its mark. Her legs buckled, her hands reaching out for something, someone, but there was nothing to hold on to. She fell, her eyes still wide with shock, her last thoughts surely on the children she would never get to see grow up. The gunfire didn't stop. One by one, the family fell. The father who had worked tirelessly to provide, the mother who had loved unconditionally, the sister who had barely begun to live, the brother who had once been a friend, and Kiara. Sweet Kiara, carrying a child who had yet to take his first breath. The innocent life inside her, full of nothing but promise, was silenced before he even had the chance to cry. Raymond III's heart was pounding, his breath ragged. The house smelled like smoke and blood, the warmth of life already slipping away from the people who had once filled it. He stood there, staring at what he had done, and for a moment the weight of it all pressed down on him like an avalanche. But he had already gone too far, there was no turning back. He moved through the house, stepping over the bodies, his mind racing. He needed to go, he needed to get away before anyone realized what had happened. But as he reached the door, something made him stop. A faint, wheezing breath. His eyes snapped to the floor, and that's when he saw him. His younger brother. The 15-year-old was barely clinging to life, his chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. Blood pooled beneath him, but his eyes were still open, still filled with something that Raymond III couldn't quite place. Shock? Fear? Or something worse? Betrayal? For a moment, neither of them moved. Time stretched, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. Raymond III tightened his grip on the gun. He should finish it. He should make sure there were no loose ends. But something held him back. Maybe it was the way his brother looked at him, not just with fear but with disbelief, as if he still couldn't understand how the person he had grown up with, the brother who had once played video games with him, shared inside jokes and protected him from bullies, could be the same person standing over him now, gun in hand. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe, deep down, some small part of Raymond III, the part that hadn't yet drowned in the darkness, was afraid. Afraid of what he had done. Afraid of what he had become. He turned and ran. The cold night air hit him like a slap. His breath came out in sharp bursts, his heart hammering. He didn't stop to look back. He didn't check to see if anyone had heard. He just kept moving, his mind racing with what he had done and what he needed to do next. But he had made a mistake that would come back to haunt him, because his younger brother had survived. And he knew exactly who had pulled the trigger. The house on North Adams Street was eerily silent when law enforcement arrived. The winter air carried an unnatural stillness, a sharp contrast to the horror that had unfolded inside just hours earlier. Officers moved with caution, their boots echoing against the cold floor as they stepped through the doorway. What they found would be burned into their memories forever. The bodies lay where they had fallen, lifeless, the warmth of family now replaced with an unforgiving chill. The scene was chaotic yet deliberate, no signs of forced entry, no struggle from an outside intruder. This was the work of someone from within. Amid the devastation, a sound broke through the silence, a weak, rattling breath. The officers turned toward the source, their flashlights catching the blood-soaked figure of the 15-year-old boy clinging to life. He had been left for dead, but he had survived. His body trembled as he fought to speak, to form the words that would unravel the mystery before it even began, and, when he did, the truth cut through the air like a knife. His brother, Raymond Childs III. The name sent a jolt through the officers. A son, a brother, not a stranger, not an outsider. One of their own had done this. The race to find him began immediately. Calls were made, patrol cars dispatched. Every passing minute felt like a lifetime, knowing that somewhere out there a teenager who had just executed his family was still walking free. But Raymond III wasn't far. Investigators tracked his movements, following a trail of digital breadcrumbs left behind in a world where no one was truly invisible. Surveillance cameras captured glimpses of him as he made his way across the city. Cell phone data filled in the blanks. He hadn't disappeared into the night like a seasoned criminal. Instead, he had gone where many scared teenagers go when the world feels like it's closing in, straight to a friend's house. It wasn't long before officers closed in on the location. The house was quiet, just another home in another neighborhood, unaware of the horror that lay beneath the surface. They surrounded it, weapons drawn, ready for anything. But when they entered, there was no resistance. Raymond Childs III didn't run, he didn't fight, he didn't scream, he simply surrendered as if the weight of what he had done had finally settled onto his shoulders. He was taken into custody without incident, his hands cuffed behind his back as he was led away from the place where he had sought refuge. But there was no refuge from this, no escape from what he had done. Detectives wasted no time in questioning him. They needed answers. The world needed answers. How could a 17-year-old methodically execute his family in cold blood? What had pushed him past the breaking point? The argument over curfew was the catalyst, that much was clear. His father had been strict, unwilling to let his son disregard the rules. But could that alone have led to such an unspeakable act? Investigators searched for deeper motives. Had there been long-standing resentment, hidden rage, or had something inside him simply snapped? Raymond III spoke little. He didn't cry. He didn't express regret. His face remained impassive, giving detectives nothing to work with. But the evidence told its own story, and the survivor's testimony filled in the gaps. He had walked through the house with intention. He had known exactly what he was doing. Each shot fired was deliberate, no hesitation, no mercy. Even when he looked into the eyes of his own blood, even when his mother reached out for him in disbelief, he had pulled the trigger. There was no question about his guilt. The crime was as clear-cut as they come. But the why remained elusive, an unanswered question that would haunt everyone who tried to make sense of it. The weight of his actions loomed over him as he was processed. Fingerprints taken, mugshot captured, a teenager who, just days before, had been another face in the crowd, now branded as a murderer. News of the massacre spread like wildfire. The city was stunned. Friends, neighbors, classmates, all struggled to reconcile the boy they knew with the monster he had become. Social media buzzed with speculation. How could someone so young be capable of such brutality? What had been brewing beneath the surface that no one had seen? The child's family had been respected, known for their strong values and tight-knit bond. To the outside world, they were the picture of stability. But behind closed doors, something had festered, something dark enough to end in unimaginable violence. And now there were no second chances, no way to take it back. As Raymond III sat in the interrogation room, staring at the walls that now confined him, the world outside continued to spin, grappling with the horror of what had been done. But for those left behind, there was no moving forward. Not yet. There was only grief. And the unbearable, inescapable question, why? The question of why loomed over the courtroom as the trial of Raymond Childs III began. It was the same question that haunted the community, the investigators, and even the prosecutors who had meticulously built the case against him. How could a 17-year-old methodically take the lives of 6 family members, including his own parents and younger siblings, without remorse? And more importantly, what kind of justice could truly account for such an unspeakable crime? Because of the sheer brutality of the murders, the state of Indiana wasted no time in deciding to charge Raymond as an adult. There would be no juvenile court leniency. The crimes were too severe, the evidence too overwhelming. Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears took the lead in the case, making it clear from the outset that this was not a crime of passion or a moment of temporary insanity. It was cold, calculated, and deliberate. Mears stood before the jury and laid out the timeline with chilling precision, how Raymond had walked through the home room by room, executing his family in cold blood, how he had gone back to ensure there were no survivors, how he had fled the scene with the same sense of detachment as if he were simply leaving after a minor argument. Mears made sure the jury understood the weight of what had been done. He detailed the evidence: ballistic reports matching the gun to Raymond, forensic analysis confirming his presence at the crime scene, and the most damning piece of all, the survivor's testimony. The 15-year-old, the only member of the family left alive, had sat on the witness stand and recounted every horrific detail, his voice trembling but clear. He had seen his brother's face, watched as he raised the gun, felt the impact of the bullets tearing through his own body, and then he had played dead, listening as Raymond moved through the house, ensuring no one else lived to tell the story. The defense attempted to paint a different picture, one of a troubled young man pushed past his breaking point. They brought up the strict household, the high expectations placed on Raymond, the argument that had set the events in motion, but none of it could justify what had happened. The jury saw through it. It took only 5 days to present the case, and just 3 hours for the jury to decide his fate. Guilty, on all accounts. When the verdict was read, Raymond stood motionless, his face unreadable. There were no tears, no visible reaction. It was as if the weight of reality hadn't quite settled in yet, as if he hadn't fully grasped that he would never again be free. The sentencing hearing followed in January 2025. Family members, neighbors, and even strangers from the community filled the courtroom, watching as the judge prepared to hand down what would be one of the longest sentences in state history: 360 years in prison, 55 years for each of the 6 murders, 30 years for the attempted murder of his younger brother. The numbers were staggering, a sentence so long that there was no possibility of release in his lifetime, no parole, no second chances, just the rest of his days spent in a cell, surrounded by walls that could never be broken. When given the chance to speak, Raymond finally broke his silence. His voice was quiet but firm. He said he loved his family, that he thought about them every day, that he didn't understand how things had come to this. But the words rang hollow. There was no apology, no confession, no moment of reckoning, only the cold, hard truth, that no matter what he said, no matter how much he claimed to love them, his actions had spoken louder than anything he could ever say. The case closed, but the wounds it left behind remained wide open. The community still struggled to comprehend how such a tragedy could have happened. Could anything have been done to prevent it? Were there warning signs that everyone missed? In the end, it didn't matter. The child's family was gone, leaving only pain and unanswered questions in their wake. As Raymond was escorted from the courtroom, one last question lingered in the air. Was justice truly served? What do you think? Should he have received a harsher sentence, or do you believe justice was done? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe children should never be killed for fun, subscribe to the channel. Only those who believe otherwise won't.